So thank you to the organizers for inviting me, and thank you to you all for taking the time to attend this talk. And thank you for the very kind introduction. My name's Anita Ka, doctor, researcher, CEO of Cost Discovery. And now it's no secret that my mother died of rheumatoid arthritis when I was 13, and that last year, 24 years later, we made a significant licensing deal to commercialize a novel drug for rheumatoid arthritis. And this is the story of what happened in between. By experiencing first-hand problems, then we're truly motivated to try to find solutions. What problems do you encounter? And how will you try to solve them? My problem was my mother, with her rheumatoid arthritis, or abbreviated RA. When I was 8, she was bedridden, her muscles were wasted, she had a moon face from the steroid side effects, and she could barely open her eyes from the complications of disease. And 5 years later, she died, bedridden for those last 5 years. RA is an autoimmune disease. It's a chronic disease of the joints, but it affects other organs too. An autoimmune disease is a disease where the body attacks itself. And RA affects about 1 in 150 people. So if you think of all your Facebook friends, there may be a few with RA. And if not RA, there are probably a few with an autoimmune disease, which affects about 1 in 20 people. So autoimmune disease examples: psoriasis, colitis, multiple sclerosis, spondylitis, etc. Here's a picture of a diseased joint in RA. It's a cross-section of bone and cartilage. And normally, our cartilage is smooth, but you can see there's jagged edges here. This is because a lot of cells have contributed to inflammation and caused the erosion here. So if we look at this more closely in a schematic, and let's work backwards. Again, there's bone and cartilage, which should be smooth, but here I've tried to show it's been eroded. And cells, osteoclasts, they contribute to the erosion in bone. And MMPs, matrix metalloproteinases, degrade cartilage. And cells such as fibroblasts and chondrocytes secrete MMPs. And then interleukins, these are cytokines, and there's other cytokines too. They act as signals between cells, and they drive the inflammation in RA. And it is these that are now being signaling to cells to drive the inflammation in RA. So importantly, these 4 cytokines here, particularly TNF-alpha, which is largely the biologics market for autoimmune diseases. So the best-selling drug, Humira, worth billions in yearly revenues, is a TNF-alpha blocker. And several types of cells secrete cytokines, importantly T cells in RA. And parallel to this, there's another cascade of events that I'd briefly like to mention, and that's the antibody production. So normally, our bodies would produce antibodies to foreign molecules, but in some autoimmune diseases, they're produced to self molecules, so they're called autoantibodies, auto meaning self. And they attract more synovial cells, as I showed in the previous picture, to the site of inflammation. And they're produced by plasma cells, which are differentiated B cells. And B cells are a type of antigen-presenting cell. They present an antigen to T cells. And normally this would be a foreign antigen, and the T cell recognizes it as foreign and then starts its war. And it's unknown in RA whether this is foreign or self, but we believe it's probably self, and that the T cell isn't able to recognize that this is from the body and still starts the war. So that is the status quo, very short overview of the pathophysiology of RA. However, as a child, first looking into the problem of RA, I had the advantage of no network, no preconceptions, no research grants to win. So I had a playground for myself. And the most obvious starting point was hormones. My mother got rheumatoid arthritis after giving birth to me, and my best friend's mother got rheumatoid arthritis after giving birth to her. So I thought, does giving birth trigger the onset of rheumatoid arthritis? Do hormones trigger the onset of RA? Hormones are like emails in our body. They're secreted by glands, and they communicate to organs physiological and behavioral effects, such as sleep, growth, stress, reproduction, mood. The immune system is like the army of our bodies, keeping things in check and killing outside invaders. So, it makes sense that we could be sending emails to the armies in our body. Hormones are directly affecting our immune systems in health and disease, and this is well known. But at the time, and still largely today, most research is concerned about the immune systems and not how hormones affect the immune system. By the time I was at medical school, I read in the literature and found a lot of studies show patients improved during pregnancy and got worse after birth, or, in fact, the symptoms started after giving birth, confirming what I had observed myself. But there was very little literature as to why this may be the case. And the hottest thing still at the time, even at the time, was cytokines and anti-TNF and the birth of biologics. I read about what was done in the field of hormones and found gaps in the literature and decided to do a PhD. And this was in two parts. The first part would be mapping out which hormones are most closely related to cytokines, inflammation in RA. And the second part would be, if we found anything out, could we then do a trial and intervene with some hormone-changing agent? I remember presenting this to a top rheumatologist at Rikshospitalet in 2004. And he said, Anita, it's very interesting, but we don't have expertise in this area. Why don't you work for us in our research group at Rikshospitalet? We'll give you an office, we'll give you financing, and then you can do what you like. And I said, I'm sorry, I really have to do this now. And he looked at me exasperated and said, so, you don't care about success? It's just the science? And I thought to myself, well, yeah. And we are fortunate if we're not bound by the need to succeed. So as mentioned, the first part of the PhD was mapping out these hormones. But before I go any further, I'd just like to show you a graph. This shows the age of onset of RA patients, of women with RA. So they most get it around the age of 31 to 35 or 51 to 55. And I believe this is related to giving birth and the menopause. And I believe this is triggering the onset of symptoms, so that hormonal changes are triggering the onset of symptoms. And over recent years, this has repeatedly been shown to be true, that hormones and menopause increase the risk, giving birth and menopause increase the risk of getting RA. We measured several hormones and cytokines, inflammatory markers, in RA and healthy people. The literature at the time in hormones suggested estrogen and testosterone was very interesting, so we hoped that we would find some hits with estrogen and testosterone. However, unexpectedly, we found that the hormones that regulate estrogen and testosterone, GnRH, LH, and FSH, were the most interesting. So just briefly, estrogen and testosterone, these are the hormones of the reproductive system in both females and males, and estrogen and testosterone are actually lowest down in the hierarchy, They are stimulated by LH and FSH, which is stimulated by GnRH. And going back to the graph, GnRH, LH, and FSH, the regulatory hormones, they increase after giving birth, and they increase during the menopause. So it's not surprising that it's related, that they were our hits, and it's related to inflammation. So the next logical step is to then try to decrease those hormones, GnRH, LH, and FSH, with a GnRH blocker or GnRH antagonist, and in a trial. So we did a trial with 99 patients, half getting placebo, salt water, and half get a GnRH blocker. It was a randomized, double-blind, phase 2 placebo-controlled trial. And here are some of the results. So the red bars are the patients that received the GnRH blocker, therefore also blocking LH and FSH. And the blue bars are the patients improving on salt water. So significantly more patients in here achieved a 20% improvement taking the GnRH blocker versus salt water. And this is the gold standard we use for RA trials for FDA approval, a 20% improvement. So this was really exciting because this was only by day 5, and it was comparable with biologics data at 12 weeks. And another interesting outcome measure was remission, remission being no symptoms of disease. And significantly more patients achieved this by day 5 on the GnRH blocker versus none in the placebo group. And TNF-alpha, the key cytokine that drives the inflammation in RA and other autoimmune diseases, decreased nicely in the 5 days of treatment. And after we took away the treatment, it starts to increase again. And in the placebo group, is relatively little change. And since the trial, we've been able to give this over long term, experimentally, to some patients with promising results. So I'm going to show you a before and after video of a patient who's had this experiment. It's one of our earliest patients 3 years ago who's had this experimentally. Yes, Jostein, please play that, thank you. Studies that can really say about long-term side effects in this group of patients.
So we have some pictures here of one of your patients. So this is the same woman that we're gonna see her before the treatment and after the treatment. She's after walking down a staircase. I'm sure you know these pictures. Take a look at this. This is before the treatment, right?
That's right.
And this is after.
Wow.
And it's the same person.
Thank you. So today, I still try to think, if I'm tackling a problem, how would I do this if I didn't know anything about it from before? Just from observations. Observations are perhaps equally important as knowledge. Whilst mapping out these hormones, some people thought I was stupid in the early days. They may still think that now, I'm not sure. Because it wasn't the sexy thing to research. But there were times when I myself also questioned why I was doing what I did and perhaps going into career suicide. I had turned down a great offer to work in Oslo to instead work on my own PhD 2 hours south of Oslo in a tiny hospital with no other researchers. And I can remember one evening long into the first study where things were taking longer than expected, and I thought maybe I should accept perhaps fate that one may be wasting my career time. But it still felt like the right thing to do, which removed the fear of failing and kept me going in a PhD that took a lot longer than expected. I believe working in a small hospital has been advantageous, actually. There were no other research distractions, and one could work systematically in peace. However, it doesn't help to never give up and to keep going if we work superficially. We have to be meticulous in the long haul. Sometimes I have, and sometimes I haven't. And meticulousness can be important in so many ways than just doing experiments. For example, I remember when the drugs were being shipped over from Germany to our local chemists who hardly took drugs for clinical trials, so they weren't used to the procedure. And we had to file for our records the temperature of the cold conditions when it was transported. And that, to do this, it's sent with a small, tiny temperature logger in the packaging. And when I arrived at the pharmacy, they had already opened everything out and gave me the drugs. And I said, "Where's the temperature logger?" And they said, "There wasn't one." And I couldn't believe this. So I said, "Where's the packaging?" And they said, "Out there." They pointed in this big industrial bin in the yard. So to their dismay, I went into the yard, minus 10 degrees February, and tried to open the industrial bin and found about 10 bin bags in the industrial bin and thought, okay. And even to get some of the bin bags, I had to stand on 2 of them to reach deep in to get the others. Anyway, fortunately, after about 4 bin bags, I found the packaging and I found the temperature logger. The point is, never give up. And don't necessarily believe what others say if you have reason to believe otherwise. There have also been times when I haven't been meticulous. I remember recently applying for a grant application, and my colleagues had actually told me before I'd applied, "You're going to get the grant." So I remember thinking this is a no-brainer, and my complacency had resulted in a mediocre application, and I didn't get the grant. Part of never giving up is the acceptance of the fear of failing. And I think sometimes you have to actually fail to succeed. It's cliché. I have experienced several failures. I remember around 2009 and 10, and the colleagues who had been on the same PhD courses as me had finished their PhDs, assistant professors, no problem getting research grants. I was scraping together enough money to get through the trial from various organizations. Have patience. A famous example of this is it took Edison 10,000 attempts to make the light bulb, apparently. In rheumatology, Philip Hench, a Nobel laureate who isolated cortisone and found these fantastic effects, had actually tried 18 other substances before coming on to cortisone, and those 18 substances had no observed benefit. And I'd like to mention one of those substances was actually the urine of healthy pregnant women for RA patients to drink with no observed benefit. Consistently successful scientists have never given up. And finally, above intelligence, knowledge, creativity, I believe nothing gives a greater pleasure or even decision-making skills than compassion and integrity. Compassion is something I struggle with every day. When we set ambitious goals, we become goal-fixated rather than fixated on the humans we're dealing with every day. And I believe it doesn't help to care greatly about humanity with great businesses without caring about the humans you deal with every day. I don't even think you can succeed them. I was fortunate I had great compassion for my patients, but I'm ashamed to admit I've not always been equally compassionate to everybody else around me. I could empathize with the realities of the patients' lives I knew what they were going through. Some of them couldn't work, some of them couldn't look after their children, some of them needed help from their family to go to the toilet. I wanted to know these people better. And a nice side effect of this, already when I was at medical school, was that I got a lot of free information. I found out a lot about the onset of their symptoms during hormonal physiological changes and drug-induced hormonal changes. However, being equally compassionate to anyone who hindered experiments was more challenging, and I'm still learning by others' examples. These are all excellent doctors or scientists who have helped on this journey. This is honorary consultant Roger Bucknell. He's the first man I met in the field of rheumatology as a medical student. He was encouraging despite all my ridiculously stupid questions. This is Hans Christian Gulset. He's the head of department at our hospital in Skien, Betanian Hospital. Extremely generous. This is Ivana Holland and Øystein Førre, my PhD supervisors, who were open-minded enough to encourage this work. And this is Andrew Shalley, the Nobel laureate who discovered GnRH, who I just rang up out of the blue many years ago. And this is Anders Holm, who believed enough in the work to help to commercialize it. 24 years have passed since my mother died, and I'm not finished yet. Last year, Astellas got the rights to do larger long-term trials for RA patients to eventually, hopefully, get the first GnRH antagonist marketed for RA. They've completed a preliminary trial and are now in their phase 2 trial. So what problems are humans facing today? And how will you solve them? I believe disruptive technologies are an exciting prospect. We're currently working on far-fetched technology in cost discovery. I don't know what the future will hold, but I'm in my playground again. I feel it's exhilarating being alive, free of no fear of failure, and loving what I do. So, think differently. Never give up. And above all, have compassion and integrity. Thank you.